from the League of Oregon Cities as well as from the attorney firm that she represents. And then we'll have the chance to ask questions. So there we go. Do you want the microphone?
Madam Mayor, where would you like me to, what's most useful for you? Like, where would
Do you like to stand?
No, I could do whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Mayor, members of the council, my name's Christy Munson. Just so you know, I work with the local government law group, but prior to that, I was legal counsel for the League of Oregon Cities. So all I've been doing is helping city councilors and training city councilors since I've been a lawyer. Before that, I worked for boards, I worked for school boards. So that's what I do. I understand that you wanted about a 30-minute training tonight, so it's kind of a snippet training. And I've spoken to the mayor and a couple counselors and left some messages. And I have an agenda here. I think we'd like to touch upon counselor authority and ethics regarding conflicts of interest, social media, Facebook use, email accounts, staff issues, and some issues pertaining to counselor and staff being off duty versus on duty and when that occurs. So that's what I'm going to go over, but I would encourage you to interrupt with questions. Nobody wants to hear a lawyer talk at you. And so interrupt me. I may not have the answer right away, but I'll get you the answer or we'll walk through it together, okay? So really quickly, when I first started this, a long time mayor from the city of Beaverton was a good friend of mine. He had been mayor for 20 years. And I asked Rob, I said, Rob, how did you get into this? And he said, you know, it's the darndest thing. All I wanted was a speed bump in front of my house. And he ended up being a mayor for 20 years. And I said, did you ever get the speed bump? And he said, no, I never did get the speed bump. But it's true. The reasons we run often aren't what we end up dealing with when we sit as a city council. And so you've changed hats from a citizen to a candidate to now a counselor, to the man, the government, right? And it's a different set of duties and a different set of responsibilities. And that's sometimes hard for people to understand. For example, as a counselor, when you become a counselor, you have ethical statutes that you have to abide by. And they're pretty easy. They just say that if there's a chance that you could vote or discuss or use your position to get a financial benefit for yourself, your family member, or somebody in your household, or a business with which you're associated, that you have to follow the conflict of interest. That's pretty easy. But that didn't apply to you until you put on your counselor hat, right? And so there's lots of rules that kick in, and we'll talk about the conflict of interest rules later. I'm not glossing over that, we'll talk about that. But there's rules that kick in that are different, and you have different responsibilities once you become a counselor. Another story. I had a counselor who always had a breakfast meeting with his buddies since he was in high school at this particular coffee shop. And everybody knew that this counselor had this breakfast meeting with his buddies. Well, one of his buddies happened to be a developer in the city. And they did discuss city business and talk about stuff. And the public perception was that the developer got a special deal somehow, that the developer had an in. That was the public perception. There was nothing illegal going on and no conflict, but that was the public perception. So that counselor, my advice to him, it's not legal advice, was don't have the breakfast meeting anymore. He said, I've been doing this for 20 years. You're gonna tell me not to do it? I said, no skin off my back, but it's gonna be a lot of problem for you if you keep having these meetings. Another story, one counselor always got a summer house from a friend, and they borrowed the summer house every summer for 2 weeks. Had to stop that because that friend had an interest with the city. That friend did work for the city. Had to stop that. So welcome, you're now wearing a different hat. You're wearing the counselor hat. What does that mean? It's important that you completely understand. I want you to be entirely confident in your role. I want you to know what your power is and what your power is not. You have been to the League of Oregon Cities training, so you know that singly, you have no extra authority other than as a citizen, right? So you don't have any authority to demand public records or to ask a staff member to do anything or to use city resources as one person. You're just a person. However, if a majority of the council makes a motion and delegates some extra authority to you, bingo, then you have some extra authority, right? But your authority as a single counselor is zero, just a regular citizen. And citizens have power and authority too, but it's different than a counselor authority. Having said that, it's important to know when you're acting as a counselor in your private life and when you're acting as a citizen. So this is where it gets tricky, because you can say a lawyer can talk at you and say, you have to know what hat you're wearing, but in real life it's tough. Because you get stopped in the grocery store, and you get stopped at the automotive store, and the mechanic, and people ask you questions about the city, because you're a counselor. So, what I always advise is that you make very clear when you are talking on behalf of the city versus when you're just giving your own opinion as a single counselor. And the reason that is important is because your pocketbook is at stake. Your kid's college fund, your money. Because if you act outside the scope of your authority, if you exceed the scope of your authority, you won't have any protection, you won't have any insurance, you'll be out there on your own. So what we want to do is make sure that when you are talking, you're very clear. So let's say, I know there's a Facebook page here that's a lot of people participating in this community, which I think is wonderful. It's robust, it's civic engagement. When and if you post on that, you should say, I'm posting as a regular citizen. I'm not posting as a counselor, right? So nobody's confused about what role you're playing there. If you have any email accounts, and this is throughout, every city has these issues, every city, it's not just Oakridge. If you have any email accounts, make sure they don't indicate, some people change their email accounts to say city councilor or something. If that's your private account, it should have your private name and not have a title on it. Because I don't want anybody confused about what you're saying and what capacity you're saying. Does that make sense? I'm seeing some looks of confusion.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I understand what you're saying. And when we went to the league, they said, if you don't feel comfortable with the city's email, you have the right to put another email under Counselor Hadley and use that. Because maybe I don't feel safe because of prior information that's come forward in the town. And we look, it came to this body before I was here, another council. And it was pretty interesting that this came out, that some of this information got out to people. And so to me, that's why I got the email that I have, because I don't feel comfortable with the city's email address that they have, because I understand that there's a password, but there's also a master password that we can get.
Gotcha.
That's why I do that.
So your question is, I don't really want to use the city's system because I just don't feel comfortable with it for whatever reason. And you're right, you have the right to do that, but I would push back a little as should you? Because when you're using your personal account, it becomes subject to public records
I
search.
have no problem.
Okay, I want to make sure you know that.
100%.
And then lastly, I would push back a little bit also about the name of the account. If you're using it only for city business,
Only for city business.
then when you use it, you have your counselor hat on.
It's the only time it's used.
And then the last piece I would think about is you should probably have a discussion citywide, administratively and amongst the council about what the expectations are of you, that you guys have of each other regarding use of email and communications. For example, some cities have it so that they created email accounts for every counselor, and they created a system where a quorum of the council cannot talk with each other at any given point in time to avoid an inadvertent public meetings law violation.
Well, that's slick.
It's pretty slick, yeah. So I think those are good conversations to have up front. But if you're okay with being subject to search and being the email being subject to search, and you're okay with knowing that when you're using that, you've got your counselor hat on, and the city's okay with it as far as liability purposes, and they know, yep, he's acting as a city councilor when he uses that. Yeah, but I think you gotta have those discussions.
Right, and see, when on the budget committee, I used to use my business, I have business for a lot of years, and I used that email before I was a counselor. And when I come as a counselor, I see stuff coming to me in my business address, and I really didn't like that. I requested that I could use mine, but yet it was trouble to get it. And I understand, so the city can use two, they can use the city and mine, correct? I don't have to open theirs for the city email.
I don't understand, you want the city to use your email address?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, the one, not my business, our city email.
City can set up an email address, and councilors use it as they wish, but. So, so I've been skipping around a little bit because we only have 30 minutes, I apologize for that. But I just want you to think, every time that you're out there, is if I'm speaking to the public, or maybe I'm speaking to press, maybe I'm speaking to another government official, am I representing the council's position right now, the majority of the council's position, or am I representing a different position? And if I am, I need to say, hey, this is just my position as a citizen, this is just my idea, and make it very clear. And the reason why is, if you inadvertently make a mistake, and let's say you make a big mistake where, for example, you might divulge some confidential information, not on purpose, you just accidentally did it. You heard some confidential information in an executive session, let's say regarding a lawsuit or a land purchase, and you divulge that, you're acting outside the scope of your authority because you didn't have the authority to divulge that information. You could be subject to lawsuit, and you don't have insurance protection from the city. The only time you have that insurance protection from the city, that umbrella, is when you're acting within your proper scope of authority. So you always have to think, okay, yeah, I'm going to be talking as a counselor now, I'm going to be saying this, and if I'm going to be saying something else, and it's in my individual capacity, I gotta be careful, because I don't wanna push that envelope and lose that protection. Am I being clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we've already touched on the email. Every city, we represent about 25 cities, and every city deals with Facebook issues. It's because Facebook is nothing special. It's just another forum to discuss ideas. That's all it is. It's a public forum to discuss ideas. And the same thing holds true for social media posts and participation in social media as holds true that for the email. You need to make sure when you're posting, you're saying, this is only my opinion, I'm not representing the city in this matter. And that's okay, you're allowed to have your own opinions in your off time. That's what elected officials do. That's why you're interested in this. You have opinions and you have ideas and you share them. So that's all right. But I want to make sure when you're doing that you're clear. So.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So is the default, there are pages out there, and then there's your own page and all that. If I make a comment, and it's not about city business, and I like something or whatever, the default is always I am acting as as a private citizen, or do I have to say?
You know,
This is Kathy, private citizen.
that's very good question. I think it's smart to say. I don't
Okay.
want you to be misunderstood.
And so by extension, if I maybe don't comment, but I like something that has a political, I mean, and we're talking community, not whether, you know, I like the federal government, but community aspect to it. Can I then, would it then be extrapolated that she's commenting as the mayor?
No, you know, I think generally the fallback is if you're on your off time, you're not, for example, your profile picture isn't in uniform or isn't, your tag isn't mayor, you know,
Right.
I think the default is you're acting as a private citizen.
Okay,
However, it's going to be a case-by-case basis.
okay,
They're going to look at, are you wearing uniform? Are you putting the city's logo on something? Are you espousing as if you're the mayor when you're talking? So they're gonna look at all those facts. But generally, on your off time, you're allowed to have political opinions and you're allowed to like things and not like things. That's okay. That's what you're here for. That's why you ran for office. Just make sure you're not saying this is a city position.
okay.
So is there a difference between a closed Facebook page and an open Facebook page?
Not legally, as far as I'm concerned. I think that, you know, closed can mean you could have 3,000 people on there. It's just that the administrator admits people into it, so. But legally, it's the same standard. Yeah. If you have any other questions about Facebook or social media, I can handle them now, but I just want you to be comfortable with it.
I'd like to ask the question. It's just like Audrey's taking a picture of everything in here, and we put a political page up before I was a counselor, and I'm not have anything to do with it anymore. I don't, you know, I'm part of a counselor now. But as citizens, all the people that, it is a closed place, but all the people that we have on that page that she has put on there is voting registered people of the city of Oakridge. And that's one of the reasons we did it, so they could see these meetings at home. There's a lot of people, elderly, that would like to see these meetings because they really are in wheelchairs and they can't get out. And that's why we did that. So the citizens can see really what goes on in these meetings. That's okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
That's, that it's okay that we have a page, political page for the city. Just
For the city?
For the, not as a counselor, for the citizens of Oakridge.
Oh, for your community.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we did.
But when you say we, you don't mean the city, you mean
No,
private
me
citizens
and my wife.
having a.
Me and my wife,
oh,
and
yeah.
we did this before, and that's why.
Yeah,
for the
that's
citizens.
fine, I think you're allowed to have political opinions, you're allowed to communicate them, you just have to make sure that it's not a city, and it can't be confused, that's the hard part. Make sure it's not confused as an official city page, right?
It is not.
Alright,
Rick has a question over there.
Oh,
Would a picture of City Hall as their main photo be confusing?
I think that could be confusing, I think that's one of the aspects a judge might look at if it ever came up. And, this is just advice saying, yeah, it's probably a good idea not to have, use this city logo or buildings. I don't think that in and of itself would be bad, but put together with all other facts, it could weigh towards it being more city oriented.
So like on that page, one thing that I had seen before was a survey, was it about jobs? I'm trying to
It was
remember.
about, this is before it was ever, before I ever got on council, what would
Yeah.
the citizens like to see from the councilors?
Yeah, but I'm just wondering how that, if we're asking, or if you or whoever's page it is asking, putting a survey on and asking questions to citizens about what they think is important for the community, how does that look? And is that appropriate, or is that fine? I don't know.
So, there's a couple issues with that. Generally, you're allowed to ask citizens what they think and get their opinion, that's not a problem. And just because it's on a Facebook page doesn't make it any different than you saying to people in the grocery store, what do you think, you know? However, the one thing we haven't talked about is I wanna make sure there's never a quorum of the elected council participating in these discussions at the same time, right? So it's very difficult to know who's on there and talking back and forth. You don't want an inadvertent public meeting. So let's talk a little bit about public meetings. Do you know what happened in Lane County?
Which one?
Lane County, the county commission.
Commissioners?
Yes.
Yes, I know.
About 7-10 years ago, they were trying to decide some very contentious matters. And arguably, I don't know all the facts, I'm just reading the pleadings, but they went from commissioner to commissioner to commissioner to collect votes and say, okay, we're not gonna have a public meeting, and I'm just gonna talk to one commissioner at a time. Okay, and they would go, yes, I agree with you. You go talk to this commissioner and I'll go talk to this commissioner and we'll see. Okay, we got 4 yes votes. And that doesn't break the letter of the law. You're allowed to have coffee and talk with a single counselor, less than a quorum. That's completely legal. You're not allowed though, they found that it broke the spirit of the law because you're not allowed to have what they called that was an illegal sequential meeting by purposefully subverting the public meetings law and going from one to one to one to one and collecting votes. So that sequential, purposeful subversion was what the judge said was wrong. But I want you to be confident that of course you can go out for coffee with another counselor and talk about city issues. If you're having a difficulty with a counselor for something happened at a city meeting and you're kind of stuck in your craw, that's a legal term, and you want to talk with him or her about it because you're like, why did you say that? I don't understand. I disagree with that. Go have a cup of coffee. God bless you. Yes, have that cup of coffee. That's how governments operate. Don't try to then say, okay, we're both going to vote this way and let's go talk to somebody else, right? But to discuss issues in less than a quorum, most American thing you can do. I support it. So don't be afraid of that. But if you're on a Facebook page, be sure not a quorum of you is on there, right? Or an email. You'll notice, and I don't work with your council a lot, but you'll notice if I ever send an email to the entire council, I will say, please do not hit reply all when responding to this. Because you can, in a minute, have a public meeting if we all start hitting reply all. And it's not purposeful. We want to avoid that, right? Because all of our business generally is done in public. That's what we do. We debate in public, we decide in public, the public gets to see our stuff unless it's subject to an executive session, right? So let's talk about your council's authority. You know that you don't have any authority. Picture crickets chirping in the background as a single counselor, no authority, right? But as when you have a quorum and a majority, you have a lot of authority. Sometimes, and I haven't heard that this is a problem here, I haven't heard this, but it becomes a problem in most cities at some point. Sometimes though, you have a single counselor who has an issue that he really, really cares about and he wants to know more about it. And so he starts to dig into and he wants more documents and wants more documents, or she, happens in a lot of cities. Completely okay, just curious, wants to know what's happening. If that becomes a burden on staff, it becomes a problem. Sometimes the counselor doesn't understand staff's time's limited, staff has jobs, they can't, I've been in some cities where it's an hour to a day from a counselor for requests for public records and stuff. If that becomes an issue, we generally recommend staff to say, I am not authorized to do that, you can't monopolize my time. You need to, if you want all these documents, can you please make a motion and get a majority of the council to say, we need these documents, and we'll give it to the entire council. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Some cities make a time limit if it gets difficult. Say, you know what, any council, anytime can ask for staff to help them with a project that's under 30 minutes, but at over 30 minutes, can you please make a motion and get a majority vote? Something like that. But it's a fine line, and it's a hard one to walk. Is, you know, I'm a counselor, I wanna see these documents, but if it becomes burdensome, then just bring it as a motion, and we can move from there if you have a majority vote and give it to everybody. It's best that everybody see the same documents anyway, right?
So here with our, you know, historically what we've done is any request that we have like that just goes to the city administrator, so that that can be fulfilled, whether it's documents or
Yeah.
whatever. And then he can determine, or she, how long is that gonna take, and then we'll also distribute to the rest of the council. So we don't actually have the ability to request something without going through our city administrator.
And that's probably why I've heard it's not a problem here, because you have a good process.
The charter states you go to.
Right.
That's perfect. The same can be said for staff time, using staff time, right? So, the other piece that is always an issue, not always an issue, but it comes up frequently in cities and special districts, is whether the council has the authority to direct or take personnel actions. And I know that you've received advice on this before, but you know that the only staff member you supervise and manage is the city administrator, right? And you don't have any authority to take any kind of personnel action regarding other employees. That's on the city administrator, and frankly, you don't want that authority. It's a tough job, right? And your body, this council, is a kind of a weird animal, right? You can't act quickly, you can't act without notice, you can't act without all each other, and that doesn't lend itself at all to being a supervisor of staff, right? If a staff member had a question about their paid leave, you'd have to assemble, notice, discuss it, you know, so it's just not, you're not set up to be a supervisor. And if you tried to be a supervisor, it would go poorly. So that's your city administrator or your interim city administrator's job. Is there any question about that though? Because that can often be an area where it's tough, especially, and I don't know if this is happening here, especially, I can tell you it's happened in fire districts before, where the district board doesn't agree with what the city administrator or the fire chief is doing. It becomes an issue. And what I tell that fire board is you completely have the right not to agree with your fire chief, completely. But you don't have the right to do his job. Meaning, take it up in the performance evaluation with the fire chief. If the majority of you don't like what the fire chief is doing in the board, if you're a fire board, then you take it up in the evaluation. And if, to put it better here, if the majority of you don't like what your city administrator is doing, you take it up with the city administrator. But you can't dig into his or her job. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. Just a word of warning when it does happen. So sometimes it can sneak up on you. And it always is in the grocery stores so somebody will approach you in the grocery store and they'll say, I don't like what the public works, I'm gonna pick on public works. I don't like what the public works people are doing. I saw them out driving and they were having a sandwich in their car and they should have been fixing something, right? And then you're stuck. And if you're newly elected, you wanna help people. And what I've noticed is your first inclination is just kind of nod, which kind of looks like you're agreeing with them. And so what I give my counselors is a script. When somebody approaches you to discuss a personnel issue, you can say, I'm really sorry, but I don't have the authority to discuss this with you. I can't, you might be right, I don't know, but it's not my job so you'll have to talk with the city administrator.
Usually I tell them to take it to City Hall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not up to me to decide what they do, it's up to, if they have a problem, they need to take it into them and do a complaint. I don't really have time, and that's, to me, the proper way to do it.
And sometimes citizens feel like you're blowing them off. So it's hard, but you have to say, listen, my city attorney told me I don't even have the power to do anything about
I
this.
only got one vote.
So what happens if you do have a counselor that tells a public employee or employee of the city how to do their job, or that they're not doing a good job, or tries to reprimand them in some fashion?
Holy moly, it happens all the time. Not here, but I'll give you a couple scenarios. I had a mayor who decided, don't do this. I had a mayor who decided that the streets weren't being plowed in the proper way. So he took the city equipment and started plowing the streets. So I had a mayor who's used to be a firefighter and hung out at the fire department 24/7 telling the staff what they should and shouldn't do. And I talked to the mayor, wonderful guy. I talked to him and he said, no, they love me. These are my family. And you know, if you've worked in a fire station, they are your family. But I can tell you, Mayor, they don't love you hanging out there because you're their boss's boss now. And it makes them nervous. And they're not gonna tell you that, but it makes them nervous. And it makes it uncomfortable for them. And you can't do it. And it was tough. It was tough for him to do that.
So what are the ramifications?
The ramifications are deep. So let's say somebody is trying to command staff or usurp the city administrator's authority. For example, I had a city council once, they had a big hoo-ha, another legal term, at the city meeting, and the public wanted to discuss personnel issues. The public was saying, you need to know that this personnel is a horrible person and not doing their job, etc. And they allowed the public to continue to comment, and then they started engaging and going in back and forth. Well, yeah, I like this person, or I don't like this person. What the council didn't know was the city administrator was in a disciplinary process already. And it was already being handled. But because they commented saying, I like this person, I don't like this person, all those comments were used in the litigation. And it created liability. This was actually a school district. It created liability for the school district, huge liability, huge lawsuit. And the counselor who interjected and talked about that was named in the lawsuit. And the insurance company said, you exceeded the scope of your authority. You don't have the authority to talk personnel issues here, so you're not going to be covered by your insurance. Good luck with the lawsuit and getting a lawyer.
And that's safe harbor, right?
Safe harbor is different. That has to do with ethics laws and checking with your attorney. That's a little different.
Okay.
But if you exceed the scope of your authority and you're named in a lawsuit, you better hope that insurance company is extra kind to you and allowing you to stay on the city's insurance policy. Because sometimes they aren't. And then once you've stepped out of that umbrella, you're gonna get wet. And the insurance, and the legal costs, and the fees, and the penalties will go to you personally and not to the city. And that's what I don't want to happen. I am so grateful that you ran for office. Thank you. It's not often, it's sometimes a thankless job, right? And it's a hard job. I want you to be protected. So stay within your scope of authority, and you're gonna be fine. You're gonna have attorneys, you're gonna have insurance, you're gonna have the city's tort claim limitations, all the protections of the city. Once you step out of that, start plowing streets, messing with personnel issues, or acting as a city councilor when you're acting as this on behalf of the city when you don't have that authority, that's when you're gonna get into trouble.
Only because I need to clarify. So the line, so say a citizen comes into a city council meeting and they're complaining about a city staff person. Is the line crossed when the council engages, or when the council allows them to continue talking poorly about a city staff?
I
So
love
there's
that
the one.
question, thank you.
Yeah.
So it's really when the counselor starts giving his or her opinion about what should be done disciplinary wise, or that this person is a horrible person or this person is a great person. That's when it happens. But you should not have public comment on personnel issues. What you need to say, if the public wants to comment on somebody personally doing their job or not doing their job, even if it's a commendation, I just want to thank you. I think the best response is, thank you so much. Can you please save that comment for the city administrator? I'm sure he or she would be happy to hear it. It's not something that routinely comes to us.
I'd like to ask one question on that. So if a committee member, somebody outside, approaches a counselor at a meeting and says wrongful things to him, is that the proper thing to do?
What wrongful things?
Starts downgrading what I am doing, we'll say, for instance.
Oh, you're up for grabs. You're an elected official. They say all kinds of things about you.
No, I understand that, but I'm talking about another committee member, a person on a committee that you have put on that committee.
Sure. So, I
Isn't he
think,
wearing about the same hat?
well, I think here that's a matter of decorum rather than stepping outside your authority. And so I was talking to the mayor already, and I know you're working on council rules of order that would apply to committee members also. And it's what you expect of each other. We're gonna treat each other respectfully. We're not gonna interrupt. We're gonna call each other Counselor Whitney while we're here, even though I've known you since the second grade or whatever. We're going to act, not me personally, and we're going to act with a matter of formality. And so that's the promise you make to each other, how you treat each other. And I think that is one of the most important things you can do as a new council. To establish amongst yourself what your rules of engagement are. And I can guarantee you, if you have a professional, calm, thoughtful, compassionate, and respectful council, your audience and public will follow suit. They are looking to you to set the stage. They are saying, oh, this is a new kind of forum to me. I'm gonna watch what's expected of me. And you determine, all of you together determine what the expectations are.
So something specific to our council. So we've had a complaint process that was started towards the end of last year, and then going back to complaints about personnel.
Okay.
So earlier I heard you say just direct them to the administrator. How would that personnel complaint process work with directing them back to the administrator? I mean, is it appropriate to just direct them back, or should we continue with our process, or both okay?
So I don't know a lot about your complaint process. Are you saying that personnel complaints come directly to the council?
I believe so.
No.
There's
No.
the
No, the
complaint process,
complaint
so I do not
process
think we're
has
understanding.
it has a written complaint, and council and anyone should refer them to do a written complaint on personnel. Council should never take a personnel complaint themselves. Council can take a complaint on something else. I need to look into XYZ and then refer it through the complaint process.
Sure, and I think the question was, what if the complaint process to the council has to do with staff member?
Mhm.
And my recommendation would be, city administrator, here you go.
Right.
But, sometimes my boards and my commissions and my councils are a little upset about that. They really want to manage staff. I always say, careful what you wish for. I think it's a tough job, and you're not set up for it. This forum isn't good for that. It's not a good manager. Now, how can you be a good manager? You can make sure that your expectations of your city administrator are crystal clear, that your performance evaluations are crystal clear and given at the right time, that you're not criticizing in public. We do not criticize our employees in public. We do it in private, right? If it's a policy matter and you just disagree with what the city administrator is doing, sometimes there's an appropriate way to do that in public, we can talk about that. But generally, you are the employer, and you need to treat that city administrator like a valued employee. If you're not happy with the job that they're doing, there's ways to address that, of course. So, and we can help you when and if that time ever comes. The other piece about managing your city administrator that I want you to think about is appointing, by a majority vote, appointing one or two, usually one, city councilor, it's usually the mayor, but it can be whomever, to act as the administrative go-between, between your employee, your one employee and the council. So that if your one employee, for example, needs to take family leave or has an emergency, they know who to go to, and that person is authorized to approve certain things within certain limits. So you don't have to call a big meeting and discuss it. One of,
I don't understand.
You just
that.
lost me too.
Yeah.
Oh, so I strongly recommend that the city council delegate one person to serve as your liaison to your city administrator. Meaning, if there's regular administrative pieces that come up, like your city administrator may have a family leave issue and needs to take 2 weeks off, he or she can go to that person and talk to them.
Other way, got it.
Yeah,
Got it. So when the city administrator has a need, he doesn't have to contact all.
exactly.
We can contact just the
Yeah.
mayor, and the mayor will always contact everybody, or just someone,
Yeah.
they will always contact everyone else.
Yeah,
Okay,
or
got
you,
it.
even when you delegate that authority to, say, the mayor, you could say, hey, you know what? You have the authority to approve leave, to approve absences, to do all that,
Mhm.
but just report to us later and let us know what happened. I think that makes you much better managers, because think about it, if you were the city administrator, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bosses, and you have to check in all the time for even minor things.
So when you're
That's too
saying approve leave, you're talking about approve the city administrator's leave,
Correct.
not anybody else.
No, not anybody else's, no.
Oh, please.
Just to
Wait.
confirm,
Double
I'm like,
check.
no,
Just,
No, that only
Yeah.
would deal with the
Got
city
it.
administrator.
yeah, so that's key, and I think every time you have to think about, you need to think, am I being a good boss? Am I providing the direction, the expectation, is it clear, am I giving good feedback, and does that person have a place to go if they have a problem?
Good advice.
All right, the last piece, I know we're a little over, I just wanted to touch on ethics and only on conflicts of interest. Ethics is a big area of law, but I know that on the council, there are some people who have relatives who work for the city, completely okay, that's all right. But it could put you in an awkward position sometimes. The ethics rules in Oregon are a little different than most states. There are 2 types of issues that you could get into trouble with regarding conflicts of interest. An actual conflict of interest, and just because Oregon likes to make it confusing, something that's called a potential conflict of interest. And what that is in a nutshell is, if you are taking an action, decision, or recommendation or discussion that could put money in your pocket or your family's pocket or a business with which you're associated's pocket or somebody living in your house's pocket, or take money out of those pockets, you have a conflict of interest, an actual conflict of interest. So, example, let's say Councilor Forkam's brother owns a office supply store in town, and you are voting about whether, I don't know why you're voting on this, but you're voting about a contract that you want to give to the office supply store from the city. You would have an actual conflict of interest. And in that circumstance, you only need to know 2 things. You need to declare it on the record, and you need to look at whomever's taking the notes and say, I'm declaring an actual conflict of interest. Please make sure this goes in the minutes. You have to state the general nature of it. My brother owns the store. He could benefit financially from it. And then, after you declare it, which I call shouting it out, you shut it up. To be a little crass, shout it out, then shut it up. You're not allowed to talk, debate, or vote on the matter. You're done. So, for potential, the rules are almost the same. A potential conflict might exist where, for example, you sit on a committee and you're deciding whether to give a road paving contract to your sister. But the committee doesn't have the final say, the council does. But that's a potential conflict. You could get money to your sister. It could happen. The rules for a potential conflict are, you gotta shout it out, but you can still discuss, vote, or talk about it. The important thing to remember is if you mess up on this, it's again personal liability. And if you mess up and have been getting a financial benefit, you can be taken to the Ethics Commission, and the penalties can be up to 5 times the amount of the financial benefit. So we're talking real money here. And you don't want to be in front of the Ethics Commission, nobody does. And so one of the pieces of advice I give, if you ever come to me with a conflict of interest issue, I'll say, sounds like maybe you have a potential. You could just declare it and then go ahead and vote. But why? Do you really need to? Why not just declare, this could be an actual, or I don't feel comfortable with I'm going to abstain anyway because it's a conflict. That will avoid the appearance of impropriety because your press and your community is watching it, right? And they know your sister who runs the paving outfit, right? So I often say, just because you can doesn't always mean you should. And to be extra protective of you and your pocketbook, you can take some extra precautions. So if you have a conflict and it's a vote and you don't know if it's a conflict, talk to your city administrator. They may have you talk to me or one of our attorneys. Happy to help you, walk you through it. That's the safe harbor.
Okay.
I think I might be out of time. I know I skipped around a bit. Anything else?
You are. So, do you have questions? No questions? Covered everything you could think of that?
We could be here all night
Well,
asking questions.
Okay, I was looking at you, Dawn.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'll take that back from you. Okay, and be safe on your trip back. All right, council. You should have received in your packet a agenda item with committees to review. Be safe going home.